Morning, Canoe Creek. Welcome back. It's Palm Sunday, so we're excited. We focus on the Holy Week as it begins and look forward to Easter and get the opportunity to gather together and just be able to praise God. Nothing changes from week to week, but certainly the content and the anticipation and the excitement and the reminders sometimes change. We have special Sundays, and we should recognize them. But every Sunday should be one in which we are excited and encouraged to gather together, just like Doug was saying, our vision to gather so we go out and share Christ with our world. And the important announcement about VBS, register early, register often, whatever you got to do, right? So we're excited about that, to have that as well. So we're going to be looking at just a Palm Sunday message today. I want you to turn with me to John chapter 12. We're going to be looking in John's gospel at several of the scriptures. And we get this picture, we get this image, this detail of Jesus coming into Jerusalem in a special way. And it highlights some stuff for us. It reminds us of some things that was said in the Old Testament as well. But it also really paints an important picture for why any of us might be here or for why we should be here as well. So if you would use your Bible, the Bible's on the racks in front of you. You can use the Bible app. That's not our church app. That's a Bible app where you can have scriptures, and our sermon notes are contained in there. John chapter 12. Verses 12 through 19 is what I want to read for you this morning. It says, "The next day, the great crowd that had come for the festival heard that Jesus was on his way to Jerusalem. They took palm branches. They went out shouting, 'Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the King of Israel.' Jesus found a donkey and sat on it, as it is written, 'Do not be afraid, daughter Zion. See, your king is coming, seated on a donkey's colt.' And at first his disciples did not understand all these things. Only after Jesus was glorified," which is talking about his resurrection, "did they realize that these things had been written about him and that these things had been done to him. Now the crowd that was with him when he called Lazarus from the tomb and raised him from the dead, continued to spread the word. Many people, because they had heard he had performed this sign, went out to meet him. And so the Pharisees said to one another, 'See, this is getting us nowhere. Look how the whole world has gone after him.'" This is God's word. And there's just some simple details here. There's some Old Testament prophecies that are fulfilled in this statement. There's this really unique moment in which, really for the first time, Jesus allows himself to be honored and recognized as the King of Israel. And that's pretty interesting as well. And then there's this interesting statement, the entire world has gone after him, which, I mean, certainly on their case is just hyperbole. It's like everybody wants to be with Jesus. But the reality of it is because of the kind of king he is, every human heart longs for who Jesus is, even if they don't know who he is, or even if they reject him as king and as their savior too. I just want to ask a couple of quick questions as we think about this content and work through it. First one is, what makes Jesus a king worthy of anticipating his return? You know, just like he comes into the city in this triumphant and amazing and powerful way here, he came into humanity. He's promised after his resurrection from death that he's going to return one day. And here's the reality. It's hard for us to live with that thought every day and every action and every moment, but it could happen before I finish this message. Sometimes, some Sundays I pray it does. You know what I'm saying? You have those days like, hey, today's the day, Lord. Let's just make it happen, all right? But that's the reality. And we struggle to live minute to minute, day to day with that anticipation and that excitement and that reality. Sometimes we get hung up in the world. It's like, yeah, I want that, but, I want to go on vacation first. Or whatever it is that we have put out there ahead of anticipating the greatest thing. And, and the other question is Jesus a king worthy of surrendering our hearts to on a daily basis? And so here's what we could do. We could just look at this academically. We could go back to Psalm 2. I could highlight in Psalm 2 how Jesus is the anointed one of God that God chose before the beginning of time and established his kingdom through him, as we learn through the scriptures, and certainly we could understand more from that. We believe in faith that Jesus is the Son of God. In fact, he's the very nature of God, the scriptures tell us. His death, his burial and resurrection demonstrate and are proof of his power and everything that he said. So the academic reality of who Jesus is, we can learn that. We can discern it through the scriptures, through the details. And these are good things, they're true things, they're important things, they're things that we should know. They're things that shape our faith. But essentially, when we look at the academic truth about Jesus, we learn this. He has the right to demand you bow down. He does. This is the truth of who he is. We either accept it or we don't. Some of us are maybe a little bit further on that journey and believing that and willingly doing that. But I give you this comparison. It's like a boss that can demand you work in this way or that way. You're here on this time, and you do it like I want you to do it, how I said that you should do it, and so on and so forth. They have a title. They have a position, they have power, they have authority. But we all know the best bosses to work for, right? They're people who never have to remind you that they're the boss or tell you their title or tell you who they are. Their character just inspires you to the work that you do. It inspires you to the way in which you conduct and carry yourself within that organization, so on. This is what we really want to get after this morning, is less with titles and positions and academics and more with the nature and the character of why Jesus is worthy of being anticipated and why he's worthy of us surrendering every day in that anticipation, thinking today's the day, this hour is the hour, this moment's the moment, this is the last thought I could ever have. This is the last thing I could ever do. And when we think about that, we start surrendering in that way, it really influences all that we do. And it's important because we recognize this need, because we recognize the flaw within the world. Now, look, some of you may have had your arms twisted to be here today. I get it. But even to a certain degree, you recognize or understand there's something unique, something special about Jesus. It may even be that you're just here for other reasons, I don't know. I think the majority of us, we're here because we know there's a problem. There's a problem with me. There's a problem within the world. And we go to the one who we think has the greatest authority beyond title and power and all that, but character to do something about the problem that's around us. Here's the reality. The only cure for the brokenness of the human heart is a king that defies human nature. He enters into our human nature and he does it the right way. He does it perfectly. And he demonstrates that to us, and he demonstrates his power to save us through it as well, which is powerful. So the only cure for the brokenness that we know is true, which maybe brings us to church, gathers us together every Sunday morning, is the only cure for that problem within the human heart is a king who defies human nature. So when you think about what makes a king great, potentially, is their ability to be an amazing hero, a powerful, victorious warrior going into battle and able to lead his army or lead his community to protect themselves or whatever it may be. But also that on the flip side, the king has the ability to be tender-hearted with small, simple little details. And these two qualities don't normally coexist very well. Every once in a while, you see them show up in a pale comparison to Jesus. David was called in the Psalms a man after God's own heart. Well, why is that? Well, because he had the ferocious capacity for battle. He's the only guy willing to go out and meet Goliath, right? Powerful, victorious. There's a nature that requires that of you. But at the same time, when you read some of the Psalms that he wrote, they're extremely tender, and they demonstrate his tenderness. Now, by the way, a lot of those Psalms were when he was a lot older and had been tenderized, and time has its way with us all in that way. But even though it's a comparison, Like I said, it's like looking in a bad mirror. You only get some images or some ideas that come through because the only one who is perfect, Jesus is perfect in every way. His qualities are exceptional. He is coming. We see clearly in this text that we read, the tender side, he's coming on a donkey. All right, there's no dignified way to ride a donkey. It just doesn't happen. I mean, you don't come into town on a donkey like, hey, look at me, I'm amazing, I'm awesome, I'm powerful. This is a whole different idea than that. But then we see also he is Jesus in Revelation who has a tongue that comes out of his mouth that is a double-edged sword. Victory, power. You see these two opposing qualities, which is very interesting. And very important for us to recognize. When you think about it, the ideal king is very strange to us. He is fierce to the infinite degree, and yet at the same time, meek and sensitive to that same infinite degree. You don't necessarily see that in anybody other than Jesus. He is invincible in battle and yet tenderhearted in loss. His anger can flash against injustice in a second, and he can immediately turn and comfort the sick. At the same time, he is bold and demands respect, yet holds no thread of self-importance. And he appears absolutely wild in every regard. And yet he is perfectly in control, intentional in every last little thing. These are wildly opposing qualities. Listen, there's a reason why the people, men and women, that we put guns into their hands and send them into gunfire to shoot back don't always play well with other people. It's just a reality, right? And at the same time, people who are meek or a little bit more mild and maybe a little bit more able to bring people together, you don't want them running at other people when there's bullet fire, okay? You want them running in the opposite direction. But Jesus embodies, this is why he's a perfect and amazing and powerful king. He embodies all of this perfectly. And here's what's wild and interesting about this. We get fictitious characters in stories and movies and all the like, right? And sometimes there's this perfect king, and this picture is painted of them, and it's wildly similar to this. Where do they get that idea from? They don't get it from the Greeks. They don't get it from Rome. They don't get it from the Norse or some other powerful previous entity. They get it from this wild bunch of people called Christians, whose king is where they get the image and the idea from. This amazing power for victory, and yet at the same time, this concept is found only in Jesus. Let me emphasize it a little bit more. Zechariah 9:9. This is the full text of what's quoted in John chapter 12. Rejoice greatly, daughter Zion. Shout, daughter Jerusalem. See, your king comes to you, righteous and victorious, lowly, and riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. It's what blows my mind is there's just a comma that separates two words that don't go together. Victorious, lowly. Okay, when was the last time we saw one of the most amazing athletes ever that didn't have an ego problem, right? There's not many of them out there. You don't normally have these two qualities, victorious, and yet at the same time, humble and meek, go together. We get the same vision of Jesus in Revelation. John's receiving this amazing revelation from Jesus to give to the church that's suffering and struggling. And there's this one scene where this happens in chapter 5. Then one of the elders said to me, "Do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the Root of David, has triumphed. He is able to open the scroll and its 7 seals." And so John starts looking around and he says, "Then I saw a lamb." He's like all pumped up. He's excited. He's like, there's going to be this massive lion. It's going to be the coolest thing I ever seen. And he looks over his shoulder and he's like, meh. You know, he gets the lamb. Why? They're the same. No one else, essentially no other eternal king is eternal to begin with, but possesses these types of opposing qualities in a perfect measure for what we need. So why does this matter? What does this mean? We need this king. He's somebody we desperately need in our life. And so we look forward to him returning. We're trusting his spirit and trying to form and be shaped by his spirit to kind of try and order our world around us. But we're like a bunch of clumsy toddlers. That's about how good we are at ordering our world around us as we wait on the perfect King and ultimately allow him to lead us in this way. And so we need our King to return for our world. First and foremost for our world, because the world around us demands justice. Your heart demands justice. Let me give you an example before I give you an illustration. Like this week, your heart demanded justice on I-4 or one of the other surrounding roads. Trust me, if you drive, your heart demanded justice this week at some point. And then you did the very injustice to somebody else while you were driving too, probably, okay? Is this not true? Is this not true? I just know because it's true for me. I'm just telling on myself. Figure we could all be honest for a moment, talk about how poor we are at driving, whatever it is. Okay, moving on. Let me tell you something that is a lot less lighthearted. It's a story about Lydia Kingfisher, and really her story begins a long way back, and it's an old story, but it begins with the Trail of Tears. It begins with broken promises. It begins with the president, Andrew Jackson, who defied the Supreme Court's orders, and he still forced the Cherokee Indians off their land and other tribes as well from Georgia, and they had to make a long walk, and many of them died. And at the end of the day, Lydia Fisher ended up being one of them. Settled into a new land, then allotment was something that was established because Indians didn't own their own land. Native Americans didn't own their own land. They owned it collectively together, and we couldn't understand that because why? We couldn't monetize it, right? We couldn't take it from them if that was the case. And so they created this allotment so everybody was given land. But if you're a partial blood Indian, there were laws worked in where your land could be taken. If you're a full-blooded Indian like Lydia Kingfisher, full Cherokee, only spoke Cherokee, you were a high target for a grifter. Because you see, the government would apply to you a guardian that would make decisions for you on your behalf for your land because you didn't understand our ways or what we need to do. Lydia Kingfisher was one of those people, but she wasn't ignorant, and she was a strong woman. She had her own business, a laundry business. Well, one of these grifters came to her one day, was going to try and make a deal to where he could become her guardian. She didn't want anything to do with it. Well, he threw one of her hot pots onto her, almost killed her, but it disabled her permanently where she couldn't continue her business. This is not a story. This is historical fact, by the way, everybody. And so he ends up taking her to court. In court, the judge ends up assigning him her guardian. The man who attacked her becomes her guardian. Guess who ended up with her land? The judge. How many stories would fill up this room if they were told of the injustice that's been done and is still being done? Listen, I ain't got to tell you stories from the early 1900s, late 1800s, for you to say, look, I know of injustice. It happened in my life this week. It happens all the time around the world, whether we just pick up and read a news article or we watch something online. In our hearts, our world is begging and demanding for someone to come and fix it. Because I guarantee you this, the more time we get to try and fix it, the more we're going to make it worse. And we've seen that. We need a king that's greater than any judge, that's greater than any president, greater than any ruler of any time, one who can ferociously deal with that type of injustice in a flash, and yet tenderly put his arm around us to care for us in our most significant pains. Listen, here's what we know of Jesus. I want to continue with John chapter 2. This is after he comes in for Passover, and we see this side of Jesus, which is so important. In John 2, it says, the Passover of the Jews was near. Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and he found in the temple those who were selling oxen and sheep and doves and the money changers seated at their tables. And he made a scourge of cords, a whip. Now I want you to see that and highlight that because he's thinking about what he's going to do. He's processing. He's preparing. He's role-playing in his mind with this is what's about to happen. And he drove out all of them from the temple with the sheep and the oxen, and he poured out the coins. I mean, he's flipping over money holders, and he's turning over tables. And to those who were selling the doves, he said, take these things away. Stop making my Father's house a place of business. Now, I could go into the cultural reasons why there was injustice taking place within that situation. But I just love this because it reminds us when people say, well, oh, Jesus was all about love. He just loved people and he just cared for them. And yeah, sometimes he loved them with a whip. We see this ferocious nature that he has, and yet how he balances that with his tender love and his care. And we need that king to come into the temple and turn things around. It's absolutely necessary. We need a king to come because our world is broken every way. But here's the reality. It has to start with our hearts. It has to start with your heart, with my heart. This is where it begins. This is where the change happens, because all of us sometimes are like, yeah, come kick over the tables, flip the temple. Are you ready for him to kick over the tables of your heart? Because at the end of the day, he told us very clearly that we are his temple. And so therefore that change begins. That whip comes to my heart first. It comes to your heart first. And so we need our king to return for our hearts. It's only through receiving the king's spirit that you can be made whole, that we can be made ultimately complete. Now, here's the crazy reality. You know what the disciples' first assignment was? Like, Jesus has left. He said, this is the first thing I need you to do. It's probably like amazing, right? Climb this mountain, get that eagle, grab the golden egg, win the game. Or something crazy assignment. This is the first thing I want you to do, Jesus says to them. When I leave, whatever you do, make sure you do this first. What is it? Wait. Here's what Jesus, I love this. I love interpreting stuff too. Jesus essentially says, y'all gonna screw it up, okay? So just wait, don't do anything. It's like when we leave a little toddler in a room for 30 seconds, we come back and the whole house is rearranged and painted. You know, just don't do anything. Don't touch anything. Don't go anywhere. Just sit here. I'll be back in 30 seconds, right? He said, wait for the Spirit to come. He said, don't do anything until the Spirit comes. When the Spirit comes, it'll bring about change that's radical. Listen, the hardest thing any disciple ever does, every single one of us in this room, that we do or have to do is wait. Just sit around and allow the Lord to bring about something different and change. I remember years ago, it was my first college class ever. And one of my last college classes for a long time. That's a whole other story, all right? We'll talk about that in another sermon. It was psychology. I was 18. I don't know what in the world I'm doing in a psychology class at 18. I was a walk-in psychology class, but there was a big nor'easter. The surf was firing. I didn't want to be anywhere near a classroom. I don't even like classrooms when I don't have to be in a class. You know what I'm saying? And so I desperately wanted to get out to the ocean. Well, about halfway through this class, this professor finally just looked at me and said, Mr. Runnels, where do you have to go? I hadn't said a word. He just read my body language, and he could tell I was not waiting well. He said, why don't you just do us all a favor and get out of here, and you'll be less distracting. How are you at waiting? You know, on the Lord to change, to grow, to develop you. I mean, when we look at the scriptures, Abraham waited for a promise for a long time. Joseph waited in prison for purpose in his life. Moses, Caleb, and Joshua waited in the wilderness for quite a few years. Job waited through suffering, through the context of suffering. David waited for God to make him a king. If you don't know that story, remember his friends encouraged him, now's the time, kill the king, and you could become king. He said, no, only God should be the one who makes me king. Daniel waited in prayer for a breakthrough in his culture and in his life. And Jesus waited to begin his ministry. I mean, could you imagine how many years Jesus was just sitting there thinking, okay, it's almost time, it's not yet time. And for us, man, sometimes we have a hard time with waiting till tomorrow. Or we want to see something radically change in our life overnight. I can't tell you how many times I've sat with somebody and said, look, you want to fix tomorrow what you've been doing for the last 4, 5, 6 years. There's no logical sense in any of that. But we're told that the Spirit can grow us as we wait on the Lord and trust in Him. Ben Patterson, in his book, Waiting, made a great statement. He said, waiting is not just the thing we have to do until we get what we hope for. Waiting is the process by which we become what we hope for. Great statement in the context of the Scriptures. So the Spirit of God has the ability to make us into something that makes us resemble the King we are hoping for and longing for and waiting for. It's His Spirit that is forming us. And, at the end of the day, you may be a person who is a very overbearing person, a very gruff person, somewhat of a barbarian, so to speak. How are you allowing Jesus to come to your heart and turn over your tables in order to bring His tenderness into your life? You might be somebody who's very much more meek and mild, and so therefore you don't really ever speak up or say things like you should, and you need more courage. How are you allowing the Lord to come into your life and turn over tables to begin to grow you? We're all going to have different personalities. We may be one way versus the other more, and that's fine, but we are supposed to be growing into the image and likeness of Christ, and the Spirit is the only way in which that happens. When we let Jesus come in, and sometimes He comes in with a whip. And sometimes He comes in and turns things over and rearranges the furniture. And the question is, are we willing to let that happen in our lives? Because we need our King to return for all sin. For all sin in our lives, whatever struggle we may have, the only tender, loving, and gracious care of Jesus is the only thing that can remove sin and give new opportunities every day. See, sometimes people will paint this straw man picture and say, well, you got this God of the Old Testament, it's the mean, angry God. You got the God of the New Testament, this Jesus, He's all loving, all this and that. We just want the one of the New Testament. Well, the reality of it is Jesus is the perfect image of God. And He embodies both. I've demonstrated that. We see that. And the Scriptures from beginning to end talk about the tenderness of God, the tenderness to save anyone and to heal all sin. Yeah, listen, from Deuteronomy 32, it talks about God as an eagle who spreads his wings over her nest, to stir up the nest, to protect the birds, to teach them to fly. It talks in Psalm 103 about how God is a father with compassion. Isaiah 62, He's like a bridegroom rejoicing, excited for the bride who's coming. In Isaiah 66, He's like a mother who comforts the child when it's fallen and skint its knee on the ground. Ezekiel 34, He's a shepherd who guides and leads and seeks you, the sheep, me. A refiner that refines the heart, Malachi chapter 3. In Matthew 23, Jesus tells us He is like a hen who gathers and compassionately cares for her chicks. Jesus made it clear. He did not come to condemn the world. He came to save the world ultimately. In God's tender heart, His compassion to us, His patience with us is to bring about salvation from sin. Here's the deal. Everybody loves a bargain, right? I don't know about you, but I'm always on Facebook Marketplace looking to buy something I didn't know I needed just because it was a bargain. I'm like, hey, man, that's like $200 less than what it should be, so I'm going to go buy it, all right? One time here a few years back, about 3 or 4 years ago, I think, my wife and I were in Georgia for a family event, and there's this sock hop place that's supposed to be really well known, so we're going to go check it out because they got stuff we don't know we need. We're going to buy it, you know what I'm saying? But they actually had socks. I was amazed. I was like, oh, hey, a sock hop with socks. And there was this bag of socks. It was like this massive bag of socks. And I needed socks, so it was a perfect storm. And they were cheap. They were like, I think they were like $3 for this massive thing of socks. And I'm so excited. I get to look at it. And it says, in quotes, slightly wrong. Now I'm intrigued. I mean, if they were $23, I'm buying them. I just got to know what a slightly wrong sock is like. Well, they're slightly wrong, but I still wear them, just not in public. Listen, our hearts are more than slightly wrong. Our world is more than slightly wrong. And the more we get next to God, closer to God, the more our heart recognizes that, the more our heart is pained by it, and the more our heart longs for our King to come, for our world, for our hearts, and for all sin. And, as one person really put it well, because Jesus was asked, why do you eat with sinners? And his clear, simple answer was, I've come to heal those who are sick, which is all of us. And one person put it well. He says, I have been comforted for more than 20 years by the thought that Jesus welcomes not only sensible sinners, but stupid ones too. Which one are you? Either way, we all need Jesus to come.